one of only 13 from a class of 173 to make it through to graduation, Chad served his country on SEAL Teams 1 and 7 for 5 years. Will you please give a warm Chattanooga welcome to Chad Williams?
An idea of what my team was doing on the last deployment I was involved in on land. We were out in Iraq, and we were given the duty of hunting down some men that make suicide vests and roadside bombs. And while we're out there, we decided let's work with the ISOF, that's the Iraqi Special Operations Forces. And one of our goals with these guys really was just to teach them how to fight their own fights. And so the best way to do that is to not only work with them on base, take them out to the ranges, teach them some close quarters combat, mission planning. The best thing to do is really go outside the wire and fight side by side with them. Well, if you can imagine a whole deployment going by pretty good, we bagged and gagged some bad dudes, making the world a better place, and we're coming up on what looked like just enough time on the calendar to do maybe one more operation. We weren't really sure if the ISOF was ready for us to roll out on them, so we decided for this final operation, let's try and make it a sort of graduation operation. We'll let them plan the whole thing from the ground up, and we'll be there with them just in case things go bad. So they start from scratch. They need a source of information. So they're hitting the streets, and they get this guy. It's giving them some intel. He's telling them about another man's an Iraqi policeman by day, but at night back home, really what this guy's up to, he's one of these bomb makers. And to kind of give you an idea of the type of character that makes a suicide vest, you know, oftentimes these guys are not the ones that want to actually strap it on themselves. In fact, they have such a difficult time finding somebody else to put one on, that in one instance over there, they're so depraved that they took two mentally handicapped women, strapped these vests onto them, shoved them off into a crowded marketplace, watched from a distance like cowards as they set it off with a remote, killing these women and so many more. So this kind of gives you an idea of the type of scumbags we're going after here. But the ISOF, they've got this guy's number. And they're presenting this whole plan to us, how they want to get there, get in, grab the guy, extract, and they bring up one other thing. They say, hey, look, when we operate with you SEALs, we notice that we tend to get shot at a little bit more than you guys do, and we think we figured out why. And we're curious, we're like, okay, what is it? And they're like, it's the uniforms. We're like, really? The color of our uniforms, not the way we shoot, move, communicate, you think it's the uniforms? We're like, yeah. So they're saying, we're wondering for this final operation, if you'd be willing to maybe take off your American colored uniforms, and we got a pile of ISOF uniforms for you guys to put on. So like, okay, you want us to get shot at more with you? And they're like, yeah. We're like, whatever, fine, let's do it. So, as it turns out, needless to say, my dark complexion start growing out a little facial hair, then get on one of these Iraqi uniforms. I blend in just fine with these fellas over there. In fact, my wife will try to motivate me to shave when the beard's getting a little long. She's like, Chad, it's time to cut it down. You look like you belong in Bin Laden's family or something. So here we go, final operation, got the uniform on. I happen to be standing up in the Humvee, in the turret. I'm behind the 50 caliber machine gun tonight. And this weapon's a real showstopper. It could really reach out and touch somebody. I've got my night vision goggles on. I'm looking through my green little world, kind of going over the usual mental inventory. All these I knows are popping into my head. I know where this guy lives. I know how we're getting in. I know how we're getting out. But one other unique I know that was different than every other operation is I know this is it. This is the last operation, which leads to the next I know just a matter of days from now, I'm going to be back home, Huntington Beach, California, surfing in the ocean. But what none of us knew about that night was that we were actually being set up the entire time to get thrown in the absolute worst circumstances we'd been in on this entire deployment, as we're being set up for an ambush and getting into a gunfight really for our lives. Now, before I touch on what happened that night, I want to back things up a little bit and share with you folks my road to becoming a SEAL and some of the principles that we could extract from the SEAL Creed. And really, this is what led to us getting out of that situation alive. And so, fresh out of high school, going to the local community college, I didn't have any real big plans. I was sponsored by Van Shoes for skateboarding for a little while, but kind of got burned out on that. Next thing I know, I'm failing virtually all my classes. And really, it's just because I'm not attending. I'm ditching, surfing, partying with friends. I'm pulling into the school parking lot one day. It's the end of the year. It's time to take finals. And that's where it just hits me like a ton of bricks. Like, whoa. I'm turning out to be a loser. I mean, the kind of guy that no young man wants to be. So, you know how it is when you're young, you get told, hey, the sky's the limit, do anything you want to do, be a pro ball player, skate, whatever. I'm beginning to realize it's time to fish or cut bait here. So I realized I'm not making it at school. What am I going to do with my life? All I know is I want to do something big. I want to do something great. I don't want to waste my life. And so I'm just brainstorming, sitting there in my truck about to go to class, and I think I come up with the perfect plan. I go, I know what I'm going to do with my life. I'm going to go become an Alaskan crab fisherman. Yeah, deadliest catch. By far one of the most dangerous jobs in the world. There's some bragging rights in that right there. It's big, it's flashy. That was the first thing that pops in my head. Well, this other idea gets into my brain. Wait a minute, why can't I go join the military? And not just, I want to be a part of the most elite. I want to go through the most difficult, grueling military training. And so right there in that school parking lot, I just make up my mind. I know what I want to do. I want to be a U.S. Navy SEAL. And so as I'm sitting there in my truck and I just grasp onto that, that's what I'm going to do with my life. I'm going to be a SEAL. I decided my first order of business is this. If I'm going to be a frogman, I don't need to go to class anymore. So I started my truck up and took off out of that school parking lot. Never took those tests. Well, of course, I got to let my dad know some bad news and good news, as I put it. And so I'm telling him, look, here's what's going on at school, Dad. But he's like, what's the good news, Chad? I was just waiting for it. It's all right, Dad. Your son's got a plan. You see, I'm going to be a Navy SEAL. And of course, my dad looking at me, trying to be the voice of reason here, watching the track record of my life, he just opens up and says, look, Chad, joining the military, not like anything you've ever done in the past, son, like playing ball or skateboarding or going to the local community college, that when you decide you're over it, you could just stop. He says, if you join the military and for some reason, maybe you find out it's not for you, or suppose you quit SEAL training, you can't just get out. Because you know what's going to happen to you? You're probably going to find yourself stuck in the military, chipping paint off some boat in Japan. Well, I can't argue with his logic. I didn't have the greatest track record leading into this here. But really, here comes that first principle out of the SEAL Creed. What he didn't see was something that was invisible going on underneath it all. It was a mindset. It was an attitude. Common man with uncommon desire to succeed. And that's really what it is to be a SEAL. I think this is best demonstrated based off of one of the first days I showed up to SEAL training. I remember there's 173 guys in my class, Bud's class 254. And the instructors, they enter the room and they've got the whole class together and they say, gentlemen, how many of you are willing to die before you quit? Because that's the uncommon type of desire you need to have to make it through training. And so, of course, everybody at this point, you know, they're saying the same thing, pounding their chest, hoo-yah. And they said, great. They said, all right, I want you to take a mental picture, the person on your left, on your right. Take a look at the guy in front of you, behind you. Chances are, if you're still standing here for graduation day, that means each of those guys you just took a little mental picture of probably haven't made it. Do you really think you're the guy that's going to make it through? And that was a real eye-opener for me, because I kind of got to know a lot of these guys, and they all seem pretty tough, and they're all saying the same thing, we'll die before we quit, and it seemed pretty believable. So I'm just thinking, man, where are these quitters going to come from? So I'm looking around the room, just trying to find a guy that I thought would quit. And the first guy that really gets my attention is this guy by the name of Barth. And this guy is not the kind of guy to quit. Barth was the stud of the class. I'm looking at this guy thinking, man, that's not one of the guys that's going to quit. He was always in a league of his own. When it came to a run, a swim, whatever it was, he was always in his own pack. Nobody could ever challenge Barth. It was never a question who's going to get first place. Always this guy. The big question is who's going to get second place. So Barth, that guy's going to be there for graduation day. I'm looking around, then I see this other guy, Gagne. And now this guy, he was the ugly duckling of the class. This guy was not the guy with the muscles. He's the guy that basically, if he was around, you know, if he was doing his thing today, he'd be playing Pokemon before he goes in the military. He was a gamer and just decided he wanted to be a Navy SEAL, somehow made it through the bare minimums to show up to training. So I'm like, okay, at least there's one guy right there that's going to quit. And I'm looking around a little bit more, and I can't figure it out. I can't figure out where are these quitters going to come from. Well, to demonstrate these words, common man with uncommon desire to succeed. You know, the real good news here is that the desire that you have is something that you actually control. You have power over. There's certain things in life that you cannot determine. You can't determine the DNA that's been given to you. You can't determine the upbringing that you're going to have. You can't determine really if you're going to be blessed with the muscles of a guy like Barth or just be that puny guy like Alex Gagne in class. But when the going got tough, when we got to Hell Week, which is the most difficult part of SEAL training, and I'll touch on it in a little bit. You know, what's interesting is the very first guy to quit during Hell Week, it wasn't Gagne, it was actually Barth, the stud, the guy with the muscles. And guess who was one of those guys that was still there by the time graduation day was rolling around, it's this guy, Alex Gagne. So again, you can't determine your DNA, your muscles, whatever it is, but that's not the real important stuff. The thing that you have control over is your mind, and that's the most important thing right there. And so that's where you get out of our SEAL creed what it is to be a SEAL. It's a common man with uncommon desire to succeed, and that's for each of you to decide whether or not you have that or not. And so that's the good news. The most important part is something you have control over. So my dad doesn't see it. He doesn't know it yet. It's all right. I'm going to prove it. I'm going to show him. So I'm preparing. I'm getting ready, doing all the running, swimming, pull-ups, push-ups. And I remember one day he calls me in the house. He's like, so you really want to do this, huh? You want to be a SEAL? I'm thinking he's getting it now. Yeah, Dad, I want to be a SEAL. He goes, great. I set up a workout for you with the Navy SEAL. Check out my computer screen. And I'll never forget looking over at the computer screen and seeing this little one-liner that was there. It just says this: can Chad come out and play tomorrow? I'm like, play? Dad, you met some guy off the internet that says he wants to play with me, and you're setting this up. He's a SEAL, Chad. Oh, you just believe anything someone tells you on the web, Dad. Come on. He's a SEAL. All right, I'll go meet up with this guy. Well, as it turns out, there's more of a conversation my dad had with this Navy SEAL that I didn't know about at the time. It was on the phone. I got the backstory later, but I'll just give it to you guys now. It's better this way. See, my dad gets on the phone with Scott Helvinson, this SEAL, and he says, hey, look, my son, he wants to be a Navy SEAL, and I'm just wondering if you could just do me a real big favor. Would you be willing to meet up with him? And I'm asking you to crush him. Just bury him. Just beat it out of him. And so Scott, after thinking about it for a while, apparently shoots off this reply in an email. Can Chad come out and play tomorrow? So off I go to this place, Oceanside, California, meeting up with the SEAL in a beach parking lot. And he spots me right away. You Chad? Yes, sir. All right, Bubba. I was Bubba from that point forward. Get over here. So he's got me doing some pull-ups, some push-ups, and sit-ups. And I'm hanging in there. I'm doing it. And next thing I know, we're going for a run. He wants me to take the lead. He wants me to go out ahead of him, out into the wetlands, down this trail. He's got some gear back at his truck he wanted to clean up. He says he's going to catch up with me. So about 15 minutes into this run, where he's supposed to be catching up with me now, and I don't even know exactly where I'm going. I'm just running down this trail away from civilization, like nobody around out in the wetlands now. I'm looking back like, where's his SEAL? And so after a while, I start to think, hey, this SEAL's not going to catch me on this run. At the time, I was like this 18, 19-year-old, kind of arrogant, cocky kid. And I remember thinking the names of my buddies I'm be bragging to, how this SEAL couldn't catch me on the run. I'm looking over my shoulder, and then, just like the movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger, you might remember Terminator 2, there's a scene in the movie where the bad guy, the T-1000, can morph into these knife hands and chase down a moving vehicle. Well, that's the SEAL, like a T-1000 suddenly coming down this trail. And there's nothing I could do to keep the distance. He's closing the gap. I'm running so fast that I don't even have time to spit the wrong moment. It'll throw off my breathing, right? Well, he catches up to me, and I never saw what was coming next. As he gets past me, he just flips around, turns on a dime, and I'm greeted by his fist going right into my stomach. And I remember the feeling of just being clotheslined, those feet coming off the ground, wind knocked out of me before my back hit the ground, as this poof of dirt up all around me. And then please just remember, put yourself in my shoes for a moment here. At the time, all I knew was this: some guy my dad met off the internet. Now I'm thinking, child predator, this guy's got me in the wetlands. He's jumping on top of me, and he's just ragdolling me in the ground. I still remember the sound of the threads of the shirt just ripping, and spit's flying out of his mouth. He's screaming in my face, just going ballistic. But then he said these words. He says, you want to be a SEAL, you better stay 3 paces behind me. And that's when it hit me, like, whoa, this is it. Like, this is for real. I knew it. If I quit right now, I'll forever be a quitter. The way I respond in this moment is going to affect the trajectory of the rest of my life. And so I just reaffirm that attitude. I'm going to die before I quit. Common man, uncommon desire to succeed. He gets up, starts to run. This goes on for a handful of miles down this trail. I'm, getting beat down, getting back up, going after him. Finally, we get to this point where he circles up, and he's walking back and forth. He's got these piercing eyes. He looks like a cage fighter just ready to get it on with the guy across the way. I remember at the time, like this 19-year-old skateboard punk kid, I don't even want to project to the Navy SEAL that I'm willing to fight him at all. So I remember kind of thinking as I'm looking over at him, like, okay, Chad, you don't want to set this guy off. No direct eye contact. Just use your peripherals, sir. And he breaks this awkward tension by saying, hey, if we would have gone another mile or two, would you have stayed with me? And that's why I told him, says, Scott, I'll die before I quit. And he just loosens up. All right, you want to meet up again for another workout tomorrow? I'm kind of thinking, we going to talk about the flashback on the trail there, man? What was that about? But, of course, he wasn't going to discuss that. And I just agree. I'm like, okay. And at first, I'm feeling a little humiliated here, because I just got beat up pretty good. But what am I going to do? This guy's a Navy SEAL. Yeah, but as I'm getting home, I'm beginning to realize that, hey, I made it through a SEAL workout. And I can do this again tomorrow. I'll do it again the next day and the next day after that. So I'm getting, you can imagine, my dad's pretty excited to find out how his little arrangement went. And so as I'm getting home, reaching for that door, he was already pulling it open. He's got this big smile. How did it go, son? And I just go stepping through. Dad, I'm going to do it. I'm going to be a SEAL. And I remember the look of shock on his face, like, what? He's getting on the phone with Scott. We all three had lunch a couple months later. I had no idea this was going on in the background. And he's calling him because, like, what's going on? I thought you were going to crush him. He comes home. He wants to be a SEAL more now. And apparently Scott told him, look, I know, and I gave it a go, but I think your son might actually have what it takes to make it. I'd like to start working with him. So from that day forward, I met up with this Navy SEAL, Scott Helvinson, virtually every single day. And thankfully, it was no longer a beat down. It really became a sort of building up. And I moved on from just being Bubba to I became Junior. Scott really took me under his wing. He was like a second father to me. And I remember the second time we got together, I'm so happy it wasn't this beat down situation. And he wanted to talk with me a little bit. He could see something going on. He could see that there was a little bit of that prideful arrogance. And one of the first lessons he wanted to share with me is there is no place for that in the SEAL teams. In the SEAL teams, it's humbly we serve. Servant leadership. And so that lesson in pride right there, that was a good one. And servant leadership, what is that all about? Well, basically, the exact opposite of servant leadership would be to be a prideful, arrogant leader, right? Sometimes with a certain high position, that pride can creep in. But nobody likes to work with somebody like that. I mean, have you ever been under somebody that has that prideful arrogance? They're the boss, they tell you what to do, and you do it really only because you have to. You do it because you don't want to get fired. You still want to collect a paycheck at the end of the day. Nobody likes to be led by somebody like that. But then the servant leader, the opposite of that, I think that we could look to this man, whether you love him or hate him, there's one thing you cannot deny about him, Jesus of Nazareth. He knew how to lead people. I mean, we see a movement, his influence, we see the effects of it still to this day, 2,000 years later, and it started with a small group. So I think there's some takeaways, some things we could take away from the guy. And one of the most popular stories about Jesus is that situation where he's there with his disciples, and what is he doing? He's getting on his hands and knees and washing their feet. And, what does this do to the disciples? Well, their attitude is like, what is he doing right there? He's our leader. We should be doing this for him. But instead, they've got Jesus looking out for him, investing into him, developing him. And you know what he got out of his disciples? He got something that money cannot buy. What he ultimately got out of his disciples by being this type of servant leader is loyalty. The type of loyalty to where when he has something for them to do, like, look, here's my vision. Here's what I want you to go do. I want you to run with this now. He wanted to go out into the world and spread the message. They didn't do it reluctantly. They didn't do it dragging their feet. They were willing to do it to the point of bloodshed. And so when you're that type of servant leader, and you can't just fabricate this, you can't fake it. When you really do care about your people and you're looking to invest into them and develop them, what you get out of them is that type of loyalty. In the SEAL teams, it's humbly we serve. It's this servant leadership. And Scott really was the ultimate servant leader. In my life, guy was like a second father to me. He's investing into me. He's building me up. But our time was coming to a close. Because I signed up. I've got a date. It's set. He's got me pretty prepared. And one of the ways we'd wrap up a workout together was we'd go down to the local community pool and we'd kind of work on some underwater knot tying and get around to talking about whatever we got going on in life. And he brought up this opportunity, as he put it, to go overseas again. He says, who knows, Junior, perhaps it can make a difference. And it's only going to be a couple months long, he's telling me, and by the time you do Navy boot camp, that's a couple of months, you'll get back. I'll already be back. We're going to see him make it through SEAL training. And so I get a phone call from Scott not too much longer after that. He decides to take this opportunity. He's going to go ahead and do it. And Scott was no ordinary Navy SEAL, if there ever were such a thing. This guy holds all kinds of records. I'll just kind of go through some of them. One of them is this. He's the youngest man to have ever made it through SEAL training. And what age is that? Well, I got to set it up like this. He grew up in over 27 different foster homes. And so at a very young age, the military took him as a special exception. He finished SEAL training by the time he was 17 years old. And so I'm pretty confident no one will ever beat that record. Hopefully no one has to go through the life circumstances that lead up to beating that record. On top of that, he's a world champion pentathlete. So you've probably heard of a triathlon before. 3 events, imagine 5 events, world champion status. On top of that, he's the fastest Navy SEAL on the SEAL training obstacle course. So to kind of put that in perspective, there's an obstacle course in Coronado, San Diego, that every single Navy SEAL that ever was or is or will be goes through. We get timed, it's recorded. Scott's the fastest. There's not a SEAL in this world that could beat this SEAL. And then one more kind of funny one to look back on. You know, Scott was on this TV program one time called Man vs. Beast. And they put him up against a chimpanzee through an obstacle course. And Scott, never being the kind of guy to ever back down, when they asked him, he's like, yeah, I'll race the monkey. And so he shows up, and as you can imagine, he pulls the head of the monkey on the monkey bars, all right? So, this is Scott. This is the guy I'm getting prepared by. And one of the things, though, you know, look at his childhood. You know, growing up in all those different foster homes, he really wasn't just a father figure for a guy like me, but when he stepped outside that front door in the neighborhood, really all the neighborhood kids would flock to him because he was that guy in the lives of all these children. And so one of the big things for him wasn't only, you know, defending freedom as we know it here. One of the big things, he really cared about the kids in the Middle East, caught in the midst of it all. He wants to make a difference. So I'm getting that phone call. He's headed out. He said, all right, Junior, I'm about to go do this thing, referring to going to Iraq. He says, I just want you to know something. I've never told anybody I've ever trained before. So I'm listening, you know, like, yeah. He says, I know you're going to make it through SEAL training. And to hear those words from Scott, all I can say is, man, that gave me all the confidence in the world. And so he's just reminding me again the timeline of things. He's going to be gone. He's going to get back. He's going to see me make it through. We say our goodbyes. Can't wait to see you when you get back, Scott. So now Scott's gone. I'm a handful of days away from going off the boot camp. I figure if I can't work out with my mentor in person, the next best thing is to do some of these programs he set up for me. So I'm just waking up one day. I'm turning on the television. And on the screen, I see a picture of Scott smiling. And my first thought is I'm looking at the still image of him smiling like, what is Scott doing on TV? He didn't let me know he's going to be on TV for something again. I'm looking at this, and, you know, he's always getting invited on, phenomenal athlete, but I just didn't know about this one. As I'm looking at this picture of him smiling, that's when I see in the lower third Scott's birth date followed by a dash. And it says March 31st, 2004. And before I could even process in my mind, you know, what that meant, this still image of him smiling goes to video footage. And very similar to what ISIS is doing today with these premeditated attacks where they videotape and they take this footage and they send it around, it cuts to video footage. Scott, 3 other Americans, vehicle burning in the background, they're in the street. And these guys are filming and just basically cataloging as they're taking sticks and rods and just beating and wailing away on these guys' bodies, just mutilating them. And then they find rope and they wrap it around their legs, hook them up to vehicles, and they're dragging them through the streets of Fallujah and just celebrating, parading their bodies around, ultimately arriving to the Euphrates River Bridge. They string them upside down, set the bodies on fire, and then they begin to chant in Arabic into the cameras, Fallujah's the graveyard of Americans. Just over and over, Fallujah's the graveyard of Americans. And I don't think I need to tell you that I do not, and I never will have the words to describe what that was like, seeing that. You know, needless to say, it radically changed me as a human being, big time. And, you know, Scott got to know, the family knew Scott by this point, and so now, you know, they're catching the news, and I've got my folks, my dad, and my mom, they're begging me now, don't go in. And they're just pulling out everything, like, hey, what would Scott say to you if you could come back? I get it now, being a parent. They're terrified. You know, you see this, you think this could happen to my kid. And so my dad's making me watch it over and over, thinking that it would scare it out of me maybe by watching it. But the more I watch it, the more I kind of became stilled in that resolve. And part of our SEAL creed is to be forged by adversity. You know, that's one thing you don't have control over, whether or not adversity is going to come into your life. That it's going to happen. It's not a matter of if, it's just a matter of when. It's how you respond to it, though. That's what determines whether or not it'll be a weight in your life that just sinks you to the depths of the ocean, or if you could turn it around to be something that motivates you and you could use it really as a wing. And so I've kind of got this decision I've got to make. Forged by adversity, I decide I'm going to do this. This isn't going to be something that makes me back down. I've just got that much more invested now into making it through SEAL training. I want to do this in honor and memory of Scott. I want to follow in his footsteps. I want to walk in his shoes. And so I enter into the Navy boot camp. I make it through boot camp. I go through my A school, and I finally get my shot at SEAL training. Like I said, it's called BUDS. It stands for Basic Underwater Demolition SEAL Training. It's arguably by far the most difficult military training there is in the world, hands down. Kind of give you folks an idea of just how tough it is. I'll share with you two things. And one of these things I'm going to share with you, it's not in any SEAL book. It's not in my book out there. It's not in any SEAL movie. It's the most difficult day of SEAL training. But I figure a setting like this, I can share something a little exclusive with you folks. Like I said, the most difficult day of SEAL training, the day before you graduate. See, the very first day of training, when you show up, these instructors, amongst all the tortures they put you through, they also give you a little dog to take care of. And you might think that sounds kind of cool, but here's the deal. The last thing you ever want to deal with at the end of a very long day of training is some whiny, poopy, peeing dog keeping you up all night. This animal is like a little torture device, and the instructors know the sleep deprivation it'll put you through. Parents, you know what I'm talking about. You know, my dog's name was Nacho. But, you know, that saying, man's best friend. Whether you like it or not, this dog kind of does begin to grow on you as you're looking out for him. He's your little buddy, your little ally. He's like, all right, Nacho. And then, like I said, this most difficult day of SEAL training, the day before you graduate. See, in order to demonstrate that as a Navy SEAL, you are prepared, if this is what's required of you, to take life, you have to take this dog that you've loved and nurtured, and with your own bare hands, you have to turn and break its neck. I'm just playing with you guys. You don't do that to a dog in SEAL training. No. You actually do it to a cat, so. No. All right. Here's the deal. That's not true at all. They don't give you an animal to kill in SEAL training. So I just wanted to lighten up the mood a little bit with you folks, and I'm glad we all have the same sense of humor. You know, one might call us a basket of deplorables. I don't know. So just to be clear, it's kind of tough talking about Scott and hearing about that, you know, so it's nice to have a little reprieve from that. But just to be clear, you don't do that to any animals in SEAL training, all right? Let me be real now, though. The most difficult part of SEAL training, in a nutshell, I'll share it with you, it's called Hell Week. Hell Week, 5.5 days long, you get 4 hours of sleep. That's not per night, that's a grand total, 4 hours of sleep for the next 5.5 days. From the moment it begins, they're waking you up. This is the fun stuff, machine guns going off, grenade simulators, you know, smoke going on. You're doing hundreds of pull-ups and push-ups and sit-ups. But then the real tough stuff begins. I went through in February, you know, when it's the coldest. That air's so cold, it bites, and then you get hit with the hose, and now you're shivering. And then they send you out into the ocean, and you don't wear a wetsuit. And that water in February is so cold, it takes your breath away. And it is just a matter of time before you go through stages of hypothermia. You're linked arms with your buddies, performing what's called surf torture, and it's kind of like it sounds. It is torture in the surf zone. You're so cold, they call it jackhammering cold. You look like you're hanging on to a jackhammer as you're shaking, and these instructors love to play the head games. They're like, all right, gentlemen, we're not letting any of you out of the water till 3 of you give up and quit. We're just going to keep doing this. And, you know, the instructors seem to always get their quitters. But I'll tell you what, those surf tortures for me personally, man, that was the worst by far. And this isn't a game that you just play once or twice throughout the course of Hell Week. I lost track of how many times we did this, and I had to dig deeper than I ever dug in my life to make sure I wasn't ever one of those guys. And each round just got more and more difficult because you're dealing with a bunch of guys that didn't quit in the previous rounds. If you're not in the water performing surf torture, you run over 200 miles during Hell Week, and that's not just running around your own body weight. You're load bearing, basically a boat everywhere you go. If not the boat, you've got a telephone log. And that boat, most of the time, it's spending time on top of your head. And it literally rubs through the hair, through the skin, and the top of your head. And just the pressure of that boat on your head, it's just so great. In a class prior to mine, there's a guy who broke his neck underneath one of these boats. And then imagine, not a dry moment these 5.5 days. If you're not dripping wet, you've always got the ocean right there. So the instructor said, go get a fresh coat of wet on. 5.5 days of salt water. You've probably been in a pool or a jacuzzi for a couple hours and been like, all right, getting a little soggy, wrinkly, time to get out, I'm getting pruned. Imagine 5.5 days of salt water and beach sand. What that does to your skin. Every square inch of your body, you feel the nerves exposed. And then on top of all this physical exertion and sleep deprivation, it leads into a funny one to look back on. hallucination. I grew up watching Ninja Turtles, and I remember we're doing this paddle called Around the World, and I'm looking in the water, and I see Donatello coming up out of the water. It is like so real. I'm trying to whack him with the paddle. And I remember one of the other guys like, "What is it, Williams?" And I know these words shouldn't leave my mouth. I'm like, "I see Ninja Turtles," and I'm thinking I'm gonna get scolded by him. He's like, "Where?" Looking back on it, it's hilarious, but when you're going through it, it's torture on the mind. So what I just shared, this is a little 5.5-day snapshot of about a 1.5, 2-year-long pipeline to make it through SEAL training. I think the numbers do speak for themselves. Out of a class of 173 guys by graduation day, there's only 13 of that original class number still standing there. And that graduation day really was one of the happiest, most fulfilling, proudest moments of my life. And there's a lot more that could be said about that, but one of the things that I learned as I'm getting that insignia since I've become a SEAL pinned into my chest is that it doesn't stop right here. In our SEAL Creed, one of our lines is that you earn your trident every day. And so the point being is that you do not rest on your laurels. You're always getting into it, pressing forward. And this is one of the things for you guys in your place. Don't ever get comfortable. We should always be stretching ourselves. We should always be looking to throw ourselves out there into the arena. And at the end of the day, it's better to have tried and failed than to have not tried at all. Theodore Roosevelt, he talks about being that man or being that woman that constantly is getting into the arena. Not being that person, that critic that just sits back, plays armchair critic, and says, well, they could have, they should have done it this way. Who is that person? He says, it's not the critic who counts. It's not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done better. The credit belongs to the man who's actually in the arena, whose face is marred with dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error or shortcoming. But who does strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotion, who spends himself in a worthy cause, and who in the end, at the best, knows the victory of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least he fails while daring greatly, so that his place will never be among those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. It's earn your trident every day. Here I am now. I've gotten to go through SEAL training. I get put on a SEAL team. I'm learning the discipline of earning your trident every day. Our training really is never finished, and we've got that opportunity to deploy. Fast forward that final operation. We're going after this guy. And I remember as we're cruising out on the road, I see this sign. And it was a sign we'd gone by I don't know how many times before, but it caught my attention like this for the first time. It says in Arabic, Fallujah, Iraq. And I just wondered, because this is a sign you see before you go into Fallujah. We're just outside. I wonder if Scott's eyes ever captured that same sign I'm looking at right now. What are the odds? That sign's probably still been around. It's only been a handful of years. And I kind of tripped out on that. And the irony is that, here Scott was ambushed and killed, and little did we know we're being set up for this ambush. I don't have time to hit all the detail of what happened in that night, that ambush, but I do want to drive a couple things home. Part of our SEAL Creed is the ability to control your emotions and actions regardless of the circumstances. And how do you do a thing like that? Well, it's all about prior preparation. You don't work this stuff out on the battlefield or in the arena. It's those standard operating procedures. And so you guys have a discipline, a practice you're supposed to be subject matter experts at. And you shouldn't just work this stuff out, once you get up to the podium, right? You put forth the prior effort so that when you get thrown into the situation, the spotlight, you're ready to roll. It's muscle memory. And one of the things I love that came from my assault lead, my chief, he really set the tone as we're getting shot at, taking fire from 3 different directions, effective fire, impacting the vehicles, whizzing over your head. An ambush, the odds are really against you. It's how my mentor died, right? But I remember as he came over the radio, he was very calm, cool, and collected. His first words were, all right, boys, we're getting out of here alive, but I need you to push left. And so tactically speaking, without giving a lot away, basically meant we're not running away from these bullets. We're going to be going forward into these bullets. What's interesting about that is that's something that really only a servant leader could call his guys to do. At that point, if you don't like this guy and he's telling you to go forward into bullets, you'd be like, forget you, dude. But no, he's a servant leader, my assault lead, this chief, and he's got our loyalty. He wants us to go forward into these bullets. We're going to go forward into these bullets. And so we're doing what SEALs do best. Shoot, move, communicate. We're doing our thing. And I got to get to this point. So look, obviously I came home alive. But it doesn't always work out that way, does it? And so I really want to emphasize another part of our SEAL Creed is a big motivating factor. And our creed basically wraps up like this: in the worst of conditions, I will rely upon the legacy of those who have gone before me to steady my resolve and guide my every deed. In other words, how do you stop thinking about self and worrying about self in a situation like that? Well, you set your sight on guys that have gone before you and paid the ultimate price. It kind of gets you fired up. We think of guys like Mike Monsoor, who was a SEAL, and when he was in a place called Ramadi, he was up on a roof providing cover for some other SEALs that were out in the road, when a hand grenade got thrown on the roof, hit him in the chest, falls to the dark. If you can imagine an exit just a step away, that grenade, not his problem. But here's the rub, is that there's other SEALs that are on the roof with him, and they didn't have time to get past this grenade and to the exit. So Mikey, in a split-second, selfless act, final word was grenade, as he had just enough time to smother the grenade as it went off. And he absorbed the blast of that grenade, all the shrapnel, the metal. His body took it like a sponge, and he suffered and died. But because of what he did, every single one of these other guys on the roof with him, they all live. And so you can mark these words down in history: greater love has no one than this, one that lays down his life for his friends. That's what Mike Monsoor did. My friend Scott, for a long time, I didn't want to talk about what happened to him just because it's a little difficult, but I realized that I have a responsibility. I have his story to share. And although he was killed and dragged and hung from this bridge, it wasn't in vain. One of the last things he said to me: Junior, when I go over there, perhaps I can make a difference. So again, I see those words: greater love has no one than this, one that lays down his life for his friends. What are some of the takeaways here? Well, something that everyone can do. You could be that common man or common woman with uncommon desire to succeed. And let's not forget, when you get into a position, don't let that pride creep in, the pitfalls of pride. You're to be a servant leader. And as a servant leader, you really care for, you look out for your people, you're investing into them, and what you get out of them, ultimately, is something that money can't buy. You've got their loyalty. Adversity's going to come your way. You can't stop it, right? But you have a choice. You're going to be either forged by this adversity. Is this going to be something that's a wing in your life that causes you to soar to new heights? Or is it going to be a weight? So you have that choice to be forged by that adversity when it comes your way. And it's earn your trident every day. Never resting on our laurels. Always pressing forward, getting involved in the arena. Better to have tried and failed than to have not tried at all. And we have that ability to control our emotions and actions regardless of circumstances. How do you keep that blood pressure down? How are you that clear thinker when everything kind of hits the fan? Well, you need to think ahead. It's that prior preparation. So do the work. It's the discipline. And in the worst of conditions, relying upon the legacy of those who have gone before you. And one big takeaway here that I want to give you guys that I didn't mention during Hell Week is prior to going into Hell Week. Because this is the thing. Where does the motivation come from? Where's the drive for this? Why should I be a common man with uncommon desire to succeed? Before you go into Hell Week, they let you write on the inside of your hat some things that are going to motivate you. You have a little white, pen that you get to write with. And as I looked around, I was kind of curious what other guys are writing on their hats. So one thing I never saw on the inside of anybody's hat? I never saw them write their own name. Like when it's getting tough, you don't do it just for you. You hear people say sometimes, I got to do this for me. When the going gets tough, I'm telling you that is not going to be enough. When you're sitting there surf tortures, I'm not looking up thinking, Chad, we're doing this for you, buddy. No, you got to reach outside of yourself. And so the things that I saw on guys' hats, it could fall into 3 categories. It's faith, family, and friends. That's exactly what I had written on the inside of my hat. As I look back, I had a scripture. I had something about my faith. I also had literally the word family written on the inside of my hat. And I had my friend's name written in there, Scott Helvenston. So those are the things that motivated me, that drove me to do everything that I did throughout SEAL training, everything that I do to this day. And so my real big takeaway for you guys, I want to challenge you, is what would you write on the inside of your hat? Because whatever that is, that's ultimately what's going to cause you to be that common man or common woman with uncommon desires to succeed and everything that just cashes out from there. God bless you guys. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you.
Tremendous event, a story that was well worth hearing, inspirational, should help everyone here, including me, as a leader in the community, in my family. I would recommend this event to anyone that has an aspiration to be a leader at their work site or any situation that brings them together with people who seek leadership and want to be inspired.